In the last section, we tested out our multi-container application with Docker Compose just to make sure that everything was still working the way we expect. I'm now going to close down Docker Compose and return back to the command line. Now from this section on, we're going to start to make changes to our project inside of the complex directory. So if you want to keep a record of all the stuff that we had done for Elastic Beanstalk and for Docker Compose and whatnot, feel free to make a backup of this folder right now. I in particular already made a copy of this folder. I made a copy and called it Complex Elastic Beanstalk just to serve as a backup of sorts. Now of course I can rely upon Git as a backup as well, just to make it easy for you to refer to all of my code at some point in the future. I made the easy backup folder right here. All right, so I'm going to go back into the complex directory, and then I'm going to start up my code editor inside this folder. Now we're going to first begin by cleaning up our project directory a little bit. We're going to delete some of the different files and folders that are not going to be required for this new Kubernetes version of this application. So the first thing I'm going to do is find the travis.yaml file, the Docker Compose, and the Docker Run files. And I'm going to delete all three of those. We do not need these files anymore because we're going to rely upon Kubernetes to run our application both in a development and production environment. And for the travis.yaml file, we're going to essentially recreate that thing from scratch when we eventually try to take this application to Travis again. Now I'm also going to delete the Nginx folder. We previously had a Nginx image to serve as kind of the primary routing inside of our entire cluster of containers, but now for routing, we're going to rely upon something called the ingress service, which we're going to talk about at great length in a little bit, but for right now, just know that we don't need this Nginx image anymore. So I'm going to delete that thing as well. All right, so now I have just client, server, and worker, and nothing else. Now the first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder inside of here called K8s, like so. And we're going to use this folder to house all of the different configuration files that we're going to create for our project. In total, we're going to have one separate configuration file for each of these different objects that you see on the screen. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 configuration files. Yeah, that's a lot, but hey, we'll get through it. So let's first begin by putting together a configuration file to create our multi-client deployment. We've already put together a configuration file for this on the project we were just working on a second ago as we were first learning Kubernetes, but we're just going to recreate the thing from scratch right now just to get some of the common typing that we have to do inside of our head. All right, so inside of my K8s folder, I'm going to make a new file called client-deployment.yaml. And then inside of here, we'll put together all the configuration required to create this deployment with 3 child pods running the multi-client image. So at the very top, we'll start off by designating the API version that we want to use, which is going to be apps v1. We'll specify the kind of object that we're going to create inside of this file. It's going to be a deployment. And then we'll add on some metadata, in this case, just the name of the deployment. And it's going to be our client deployment. Next up, we'll add a spec that's going to configure this deployment. So we're going to say that we want 3 replicas of the multi-client image, or really the multi-client pod running. And we want those 3 replicas to be managed by this deployment. After that, we'll put down our selector. I'll say match labels, and then I'm going to use the same key value pair as a label that we had used previously, which is to say component web. In other words, this means that the component of our application that this deployment is going to be managing is the web or front end side of things. After that, we'll specify the pod template. Now remember, the template right here is going to be on the same indentation layer as the selector above it. So for the template, I'll provide some metadata that will provide a label of component web. Remember, the selector out here and the label inside the template is how the deployment is going to identify the different pods that it's supposed to manage. Next up, we're going to add a spec. And again, this is going to be on the same indentation level as metadata. And then we'll specify all the different containers that are going to run inside this pod. In this case, we have just one container. It's going to have a name of client. The image we want it to use will be your Docker ID, multi-client, and then finally we'll specify a port to open we'll use a container port of 3000. And that's going to be the port that is mapped up to the multi-client image. All right. So that's pretty much it for our client deployment. Let's take a quick pause right now. When we come back in the next section, we're going to very quickly put together a new configuration file for this service right here, and we'll talk a little bit about exactly what a cluster IP is, because previously we had only used a node port. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.